So just as powerfully, we've been joined by one of Brother Seal's comrades and someone who's an organizer and a leader of the Black Panther Party here in Oakland. As Sister Barbara Lee mentioned, she also ran for office, was in charge of food programs and legal services programs and other things that the party was doing. She's a writer. She's produced a book on Taste of Power, is currently writing a book for Reasons of Race and Belief, The Trials of Jamil Alameda, otherwise known as H. Rap Brown. So please welcome Sister Elaine Brown.
Okay, thank you very much. I certainly want everyone to know that I was one of those people Bobby was talking about who joined the Black Panther Party in Southern California, one of the first chapters that we had right in the early part of 1968. And as Bobby was just saying, speaking of Dr. King, of course, when he laid out his agenda in 1967, designing the Poor People's Campaign, he made a speech that really resonates here because the theme here is where do we go from here, basically. And Dr. King said in August of 1967, in order for us to know where we go from here, because the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 had just been passed. And so the question was, where do we go from here? And Dr. King said, well, the first thing we have to do is assess where we are. And he said, and I'm quoting, he said, where we are now is of the good things of life, the Negro or the black has approximately half those of whites. And of the bad things, he has twice those of whites. So if we ask the question in 2013, where do we go from here, then we have to assess where black people are today. We are 25% of America's poor, even though we're only 13% of the total population. We have the highest unemployment rate. We have the lowest median income rates. The black-owned businesses represent less than 1% of all business revenues in America. Less than 50% of black households own homes. We have the highest rate of homelessness. Half the percentage of blacks have college degrees as whites. We have the highest percentage without health insurance. We have the highest infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, breast cancer death rate, and certainly the prostate cancer death rate. And I don't want to talk about the police murders and assaults that are ongoing. So that when Bobby and Huey formed the Black Panther Party, there was a case in Richmond, California. The murder of Denzel Dowell is no different than the murder of Oscar Grant some 40 years later. And we are living under the same police state that we were back in 1966. Finally, black people represent 50% of the prison population in this country. And this country has the highest prison population of any country in the world, period, including big places like China, Russia, and so forth. So the question is, why is this true? Something wrong with black people? Basically, we're criminals, too stupid to go to school, don't want to work and make any money, and too lazy to get a good job. Is something basically wrong with us? Because that is the way where we have come to in this so-called neoliberal age, where people are asking questions like, what's wrong with black men that we're not good fathers? What's wrong with these lazy black girls that want to have babies out of wedlock? And we have gotten to a place where we have started to think that we actually have delivered these wounds to ourselves, so-called self-inflicted wounds. There is absolutely nothing wrong with black people. There's something wrong with the scheme of things in America. Outside of this country, right now, in the continent that we came from, this government has currently just placed yesterday a series of drones and a base for drones in Niger. We are moving into Mali. The AFRICOM has been resurrected, which is the African Command of the United States government. For what purpose, we have to ask that. So when we look at the wars without end, when we look at the murders in Africa that are going on, perpetrated by this government, supported the murder of Muammar Gaddafi, for example, who was really the champion of the African Union. When we look at all of what is going on, we have to ask ourselves, how did this happen? Now, we've reached a point in America today where we don't even like to say black, or we're in a debate about should we be African Americans or should we be black people? It's like, African Americans, too many syllables for me. Black is a political condition, and now I'm a black person in America. So the bottom line for me is we are assessing ourselves in a situation where we are as bad off today, if not worse, because we don't even recognize we have a problem. We don't even want to say black. We don't want to say poor people. We talk about the middle class as though there's no poor people in America. I don't know who the middle class is. Everybody is one check away from being in the hood if you're not already in the hood. So the question of where do we go from here has to be looked at. And when we look at the history that Bobby Seale laid out of the Black Panther Party, when we look at that history, we can get some lessons, particularly here in the Bay Area, in Oakland. And what those lessons are is something that Dr. King said generally when he was organizing the Poor People's Campaign. Dr. King said that if this country can wage war with billions of dollars to kill people that never called us nigger, then we ought to be able to take some of those billions and bring them back home and give us either a job or guaranteed income. That's what King said. King had become a revolutionary by that time, even though people want to make him a two-dimensional character of himself. I note, by the way, that King seems to be getting lighter and lighter in all the pictures of him. You know, like every year he seems to be getting lighter. I'm trying to figure out if by 100 years from now he might end up looking like a white woman. But the bottom line is, what King says, and I want to quote this in closing my remarks so then we can have a dialogue. I want to just quote what he says at the end of his speech about the Poor People's Campaign. He says, the movement must address itself to the question of restructuring the whole of American society. There are 40 million poor people in America, and we have to ask why. And when you ask why, you have to begin to question the capitalist economy. This is the mouth of Dr. Martin Luther King. We begin to ask questions about the whole society. Now, when I say questioning the whole society, it means ultimately coming to see that the problem of racism, the problem of economic exploitation, and the problem of war are all tied together. We are dealing with issues that cannot be resolved without the nation undergoing a radical redistribution of economic power. So then I want to just say the last thing that he said, because I think that people have misunderstood. I think what Bobby showed, the connection between the Black Panther Party and Dr. King, there's some notion that we were militant and he was nonviolent or something like that, but we supported this program because Dr. King was a great man and the Black Panther Party carried an agenda that was essentially the same, which is why both were targeted by the FBI. But what Dr. King said is because he was a religious leader, he said he quotes from the Bible, and he says, one day a juror came to Jesus and he wanted to know what he could do to be saved, and Jesus didn't get bogged down on the kind of isolated approach of what you shouldn't do, stop lying, stop cheating. Jesus realized something basic, that if a man will lie, he will steal. If a man will steal, he will kill. So Jesus looked at him and said, no, Nicodemus, you must be born again. In other words, you can't be saved. He says, so in other words, America's whole structure must be changed. A nation that will keep people in slavery for 244 years is a nation that will exploit them, and poor people generally economic. And a nation that will exploit economically will have to have foreign investments and everything else, and it will have to use its military might to protect them. What I'm saying today, Dr. King said, is that we have to say to America, America, you must be born again. So there has to be a fundamental revolutionary transformation if we ever want to get out of the morass that we're in today. Thanks a lot.
Sister Elaine Brown.